And good day, ladies and gents. Good evening, wherever you are. And this is the first Old Commonwealth show, which is basically going to be me this evening anyway, speaking to an Australian and a Canadian about assorted issues that are affecting nationalists in the Old Commonwealth. The Old Commonwealth, for those who don't know, apart from Great Britain, used to be Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and also back in the day, South Africa as well. So, and as I always do, to give people a bit of a chance to get in, etc., I'm going to play us a bit of a tune.
In South Australia I was born, heave away, all away. South Australia is my home, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia. Now as I walked out one morning fair, heave away, all the way. 'Twas there I met Miss Nancy Blair, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia. I shook her up, I shook her down, heave away, all the way. I shook her round and round the town, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia. There's just one thing that grieves my mind, heave away, all the way. That's leaving Nancy Blair behind, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia. And when we're walloping off Cape Horn, heave away, all the way. You'll wish to God you'd never been born, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia. I wish I was on Australia's strand, heave away, all the way. With a bottle of whiskey in me hand, we're bound for South Australia. All the way you're rolling kings to me, heave away, all the way. All the way you'll hear me sing, we're bound for South Australia.
And there we go. That was South Australia, which is a traditional sea shanty from the Merchant Navy. Okay, let me introduce my guests. We've got Armin, who's been on once before, who is a Canadian chap. And the other gent joining us this evening is Jobu, who is an Australian. If you guys would like to say good evening, perhaps.
Well, good morning from Canada.
Yeah, it's early days for you.
Yeah, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending wherever you are, and it's good to be talking to you.
Okay, guys. First subject I'm going to talk about, because it's affecting all of us. I suspect it's affecting more or less most of the people who will watch this, is the lockdowns. Now, Jobu and I are both from Victoria in Australia, and we have just come out of our third lockdown, which was 5 days this time, which was shorter than the God knows how many weeks and weeks and weeks that Dictator Dan had us locked down last time. And it turns out this was for 19 cases that were all in a hotel quarantine and basically didn't really spread from there. But nonetheless, close all the businesses down, close all the schools down, lock everyone in their homes for another bloody 5 days. What's your opinion on the lockdowns, Joey?
Well, I think it was yesterday, Duke, where there was 4 cases, but 2 were community transmissions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I saw that, I was sure that Dan Andrews was going to extend the lockdowns, but it hasn't seemed to happen. I think maybe because he was getting a bit more political blowback from both sides of politics this time, whereas in previous lockdowns, his little internet defence squad was providing sufficient cover for him. But I guess like for people in the UK or in Canada or anywhere else, really, just the difference in the number of cases that they've been experiencing compared to ours. Like if we told them that, we've had 19 cases in the last month and we've been, shut down and the economy destroyed for another 5 days on top of what we already had, they'd think we're crazy. So,
yeah. Definitely. Armin, what's it like in your neck of the woods in terms of lockdowns and so on?
Well, since our last talk, stuff has been opening up slowly. I haven't been out too much, but more and more stores are opening up. It's no longer just essential businesses. But that's always prone to changing again because there's already talks of a third wave, but I have no clue in which manner that's going to happen. But yeah, more stuff is slowly opening up. And, now that the temperature is slowly getting warmer, maybe it'll start getting better. Who knows? Yeah, I have no clue. But yeah, stuff is opening up slowly.
Well, we're in the middle of the summer down here. So it's like, the safest time because, respiratory diseases generally are pretty low in the summer. And like today, it was like 31 degrees or whatever it was. It's just crazy. And they locked down the whole of Victoria, including places like Mildura, that are miles and miles and miles away in the outback, It's just absolute craziness. Really, really insane.
Yeah, well, I think there's a political calculation there, Duke, because for our listeners that don't know, during the initial 3 months of lockdowns, I think it was, Duke, Victoria was basically split into metro and regional, and the different set of rules applied basically. But what the difference has been with this lockdown is that the full lockdown was applied right across the board, and like I suppose a lot of other places in the West, the regional areas tend to lean towards the more conservative voters, and Dan Andrews is a left socialist premier, and so I don't think he would have been too concerned from backlash in locking down the conservative areas as well. But
I just hope the next election he gets thrown out on his ear, which he certainly should do. But it remains to be seen if he will be, because Melbourne, not so much country Victoria is pretty conservative as far as I can work out. So Melbourne itself has a lot of soy boys and feminists and all this kind of thing going on, and that's aside from obviously the immigrant population as well.
Well, the liberal opposition here just can't get any traction in the media as well. Like most people wouldn't even know who the opposition leader is in state politics.
Yeah, if you don't watch Sky News Australia, you'd think that Andrews was actually not the world's worst premier. No. If you watch Sky News is the only one more or less telling the truth about him, as far as I can work out.
Yeah. Michael O'Brien seems like a reasonable, competent sort of bloke, but he just cannot lay a glove on Dan Andrews because he just doesn't have the platform to do it in the media.
Okay, yeah, no, I see that. Question from the chat. I don't know, Armin, you might know about this. According to someone in the chat, Trudeau took the guns yesterday. You know what he's talking about?
I can't speak about anything too recent, but I do know he after a shooting happened in Newfoundland some months ago, he did in the middle of the pandemic, he did basically make a law that outlawed a bunch of different types of guns. And from what I remember, I can only speak in a very vague sense, but from what I remember, he did. It was a broad amount of guns, and it was very vague wording, as these laws always tend to be. So it kind of just made a lot of guns that weren't necessary to be banned now banned. So he was probably collecting them. If I can, that's the best guess I can give.
Yeah, okay. It's pretty much what happened in Australia. Right? You get one nutcase who does a mass shooting, and they just ban guns all over the place because of one nutcase who does a mass shooting.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. It was some nutcase in Newfoundland. He had some mental health issues. I can't remember the specifics now, but yeah, he had some sort of mental health issue, and then they just banned guns. Yeah. They're not even like America, where they're just saying, "Oh, let's do mental health checks." Like here, they just straight up ban shit.
Yeah, we had a shooting in Tasmania, I think it was, wasn't it, Joe? That big, famous, infamous shooting.
Port Arthur, yeah, I was
Yeah.
actually down there last year. Yeah, I think it was about 96 off the top of my head. Yeah, some sort of loner nutcase type called Martin Bryant went off the deep end and shot about 50 people from memory. This little ex-colonial outpost called Port Arthur. Yeah, it's a bit of a tourist attraction now, and yeah, that's where he decided to do it.
And they just used it as an excuse to like remove semi-auto weapons totally from Australia. Like these days, like the best you can hope to get in Australia these days is like something like a short magazine Liam-Ford bow action rifle, you know.
Well, what's interesting about that is, like, I was in my teens at the time, but I don't seem to recall guns being a major issue in Australia up to that point. And then we had this one incident, and it was forced buyback, basically.
Yeah. I remember like years and years and years ago, I was in Scotland and a nutcase shot a load of kids in a school somewhere, and they just banned all pistols in the UK because this nutcase used a pistol. Exactly the same thing. Like one nutcase does something, and they use that as an excuse to just like totally remove all sorts of weapons. And yet, strange to say, when you get like people doing suicide bombs or trucks of peace, they don't have the same reaction. I have always noticed.
Okay, so I was a tiny bit wrong. The guy was in Nova Scotia, apparently, but I
think I know the case. Yeah, I think I vaguely remember reading about the case. And didn't the Mounties take ages or something to actually go and find him? I think it was all like the reaction to him was quite slow, as far as I can recall.
What I do remember is there was a lot of warning signs and stuff. I think there was a few people before that sent warnings to the police or RCMP or something. But yeah, they didn't do much until he actually did do the shooting.
Yeah, then it's a good excuse to take your guns. A guy in the chat, I don't know how true this is, Armin, is saying he's even trying to take airsoft guns, which is like even worse than UK. So I don't know. I hope that's not true. But anyway.
I mean, I haven't heard anything about that, but it really wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
nothing Trudeau does surprises me. I think he's like, I was talking about this the other day on the Splendid Isolation stream that I do, and like I was trying to rate the PMs of the Old Commonwealth nations. And like, I would probably rate Trudeau as the worst. Actually, no, I wouldn't probably. It's a toss-up between Trudeau and that bitch in New Zealand. Then I would say it's Alexander Boris Johnson. And then I'd say probably the Australian Premier at the moment is the best. But that's not saying much. That isn't saying a great deal. I don't know. What do you reckon about that, Jobu, Armin? How would you rate the leaders of the Old Commonwealth these days?
I think we're getting off a bit lightly at the moment, Duke. Scott Morrison, he's no conservative, even though he allegedly leads the Conservative Party. But yeah, I think, to be fair to him, though, I think he's the man for the time. He's for those that don't know, he's an ex. Did he used to run Tourism Australia or some sort of marketing executive type? But he seems to be a competent manager. So in the case of COVID, where it's probably not the time for quote unquote inspiring leadership and paradigm changes to a society, he's managing the response reasonably well. I'd much prefer him doing it than Bill Shorten, which was the Labor alternative in the last election, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's not done. He's been relatively good in terms of not forcing lockdowns and this kind of stuff, as far as I can see.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a states issue. I mean, he looks good because with the JobKeeper subsidy, so. For our audience, the economy was shut down, and people were basically put on a form of welfare called JobKeeper, which kept them going while their jobs were paused, I guess, for a number of months. So he's had all he's basically done is open the floodgate with government money, and people have been happy with him because of that. Where I think in March, is it, Duke? They're going to really sort of wind that down and shut it down. So
yes, it is.
So we'll see if opinion changes at that point, which I suspect it will. But all in all, compared to the likes of Trudeau, and Mr. Johnson, I think we're doing reasonably well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would agree with that. What's your view, Armin? You're a right of centre young chap. I presume you're not a big fan of Mr. Trudeau.
I mean, Trudeau, with him, he's kind of expected to be a loser to some extent. I mean, he is liberal, but I'm more sad by how the conservative movement is. Because, I mean, if there's no good party as an alternative to that, then you're basically stuck diddling your thumbs together. Nothing to do, really. I was quite looking forward to when the PPC broke off from the Conservative Party in the last election cycle, but that amounted to nothing in the end. Bernier couldn't even get his own seat back, which really goes to show just how little I think the current democratic system can really be changed. We're basically stuck with the parties we're given at the moment. I did vote for PPC, even though I disagreed with lots of their economic premises, but I merely just wanted to see how they could change up the conservative platforms, because for the first time in a while, they were actually socially conservative, but now that completely failed. So now we're stuck with this sort of blue Tory fake conservatism.
Is Andrew Scheer still kicking around, Armin? Is he still the opposition leader over there?
No, some new dude is. I forget his name. You know, he's just some generic old politician guy, basically. But he does seem kind of good. He caused some controversy some months ago because he made an announcement to conservative university students, basically saying don't pander to the leftists and don't listen to them, and that gave him some controversy on Twitter. But he's. Let me look up his. I forget his name. He was like the moderate one, I think. He wasn't like the most extreme, quote unquote, conservative, but he wasn't the least either. Aaron O'Toole, that's who it is. Yeah, he got some controversy some months back for that, which, you know, I mean, it's better than nothing, but I still think it's kind of hopeless.
Yeah. Tell me, Armin, would you say that, like, certainly I'd say in Australia that the country districts, like the outback and the countryside, etc., tends to be pretty conservative with a small c, whereas the cities obviously are the same as in most Western nations, are full of bloody leftists and feminists and soy boys and all the rest of it. Do you think it's the same in Canada? Is the bush in Canada more kind of conservative than the cities?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's like a sandwich here, basically, because you'll get the cities which are liberal, and then the suburbs, they kind of go a little conservative, little liberal. Then you get to the conservative countryside again, and then if you go really far north, you get to the natives, and they're all liberal again. So you get a few layerings there, but in terms of the actually populated rural areas, yeah, we basically vote conservative.
That makes sense. Jobu, look, listen, you're a native Aussie, so you can talk about this a bit more than I can. I think that, like, Melbourne and New South and Sydney have such an enormous influence on kind of the way Australia goes politically, and also some of the other big cities like, you know, Newcastle and Adelaide, Perth, that kind of stuff. Whereas I've travelled in the outback quite a bit, and to me, like, Australians in the outback are actually pretty socially conservative people on the whole.
Yeah, that's right. I guess you could probably call Australia. It's got two major cities, world-class cities on the eastern seaboard, and a bunch of regional cities scattered across the continent. As far as the rural type people concerned, there's a party called when the quote unquote conservatives are in power here, it's a coalition between the Liberal Party, which is the equivalent of the UK's Tories, and the National Party, which is really a country party. And there's definitely a lot of social conservative values that we'd all agree with, to be honest, in the outback, so to speak. But the reality is, it's just not enough of their MPs getting elected to Parliament to really push the coalition to the right.
Yeah, obviously, because I mean, the cities have got such big populations, particularly like Melbourne and Sydney, obviously, that they kind of overpower a lot of country districts.
Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately, the Liberals know that if they're not in coalition with the Nationals, they're not going to be in power, and vice versa. So we don't have the equivalent of like a UKIP in the UK to drag the Liberal Party to the right, which is unfortunate. I don't see a way out of that, to be honest.
I used to live in Queensland, and I remember what's her name? It was pretty big up there in those days.
Pauline Hanson.
Yeah, Pauline Hanson. She's still going. She's still an MP and all that kind of stuff, isn't she? Yeah,
well, she's in the Senate. Yeah, so we've got the lower house and the upper house, like a lot of places do. Unfortunately, with the Senate, you can elect some reasonably far right people like our mate Fraser Anning into there to jump up and down and make a bit of noise, and they can sort of, depending on the number of seats each party wins in an election, block certain initiatives that we might not like to see. But what you tend to find there though is the really far right vote, or the hard right vote, or even really just a socially conservative vote, is splintered across 10 or 11 different Senate prospects, and they end up pinching votes off each other and keeping each other out of the Senate.
Yeah, that's very much what I think happens in the UK with so many small, in inverted commas, nationalist / populist parties. They're all nicking votes off each other. That you have to have some sort of loose alliance so they don't run against each other.
Yeah, well, the equivalent on the left would be the Greens. So we've got the Greens, which is to the left of the Labor Party here, and they sort of act in the coalition on a bit of a wink and a nod. But the point being is if you're to the left of the Labor Party, you know that you're going to vote for the Greens, so they can actually have an influence. Whereas on the right, it's splintered. So ideally they'd put their differences aside, group up, and form the equivalent of the Greens, so that we can then, put pressure on the Tories.
Yeah, no, that's definitely what I've been talking about to people in the UK, is that, if you're going to have these nationalist / populist parties, the only way they're going to have an impact is if they can make some sort of loose coalition to, at very least, not run against each other in the same damn seats. So that if you're someone like me, or probably like you two gents, and you don't want to vote Conservative, because Conservatives or Liberal in the case of Australia, they just go left at the speed limit, and you want to vote for something different, for a change, and obviously you can't vote for Labour or the Greens themselves. The only way you can do that is if there's some kind of populist nationalist loose alliance, so that they at least do not run against each other in the same seats, and say, okay, if we get elected in the Parliament, we'll cooperate. I think that's the only way that you can really go these days with kind of nationalist / populist parties. Armin, Joey, what do you think about
that? Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, the PPC was our closest chance at that sort of populist right movement springing up. It was literally called the People's Party of Canada, so it was very much a populist right platform, and yeah, they end up getting nowhere. They kind of also tried to go for the sort of libertarian route by saying, oh, we're also free market, but either way, no, they didn't get in at all. They did seem to have a decent amount of votes, though, like in terms of the popular vote. They did have, I feel like 3 million, but that might be wrong. But yeah, because of how our electoral system goes, they didn't get any seats.
Yeah, you're first past the post, aren't you?
Yeah, but we do it by every municipality, I think, rather than how the states does it by state or whatever.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, no, it's much the same in Australia, although the voting system is a little bit more complicated here.
Yeah, well, the other thing we're missing here in Australia, Duke, is a unifying issue. So in the 2015, 2016 era, you had obviously the Brexit thing in the UK that led voters to sort of move towards Farage and UKIP, and obviously in the US you had the Trump populist revolution. So, but we just don't have that here. I mean, immigration is an issue, but it's not as big an issue for people as it is in the UK or elsewhere, because we don't have a legal immigration problem in effect. We've got a legal migration problem in terms of numbers, but But you'll recall that Tony Abbott stopped that in 2013.
Yeah, I've been saying to people for ages that, like, you know, the way to stop all those little dinghies coming across the channel in the UK is to take a leaf from the Australians' book and actually set up a camp on Ascension Island, which is a British island in the South Atlantic. It's a volcanic island and it has no indigenous population except the military. And they should just set up a camp there. And all illegal immigrants who arrive in UK should be sent there until they're deployed. And I reckon the guys coming across from France would dry up damn quick, just like they did when Australia did much the same thing.
Well, the other thing they did, if you remember, is I'm sure everyone's seen the movie Captain Phillips and how he's bobbing around in that orange unsinkable rescue boat. So the equivalent for the UK, the migrants are coming from France, but in Australia they were coming from Indonesia, and it was obviously in the Indonesians' interest not to do anything about it and just to let them pass through on their way to Australia. So Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison, who was the immigration minister at the time, made it the Indonesians' problem, because when they were coming across on these rinky-dink boats and scuppering them to force the Australian Navy to pick them up, instead of bringing them to the mainland, what they'd do is they'd load them up onto these orange unsinkable boats and just remote pilot them back to Indonesia, and they'd wash up on the shore there. And there you go. You get the migrants back.
Excellent idea.
And
but Australia also... Sorry, Karen.
I was going to say that really changed the dynamic. So if the UK was to do the same and force the issue by doing something like that, it will then force Macron to stop the migrants coming in at the eastern French border, rather than just allowing them to pass through to the UK.
Yeah, I know. I was just going to say the other thing Australia did was they set up camps on islands like a long way from mainland Australia, so that those few guys who did actually manage to get through weren't housed in Australia. They were housed on an island in the middle of nowhere, which of course they moaned about, and the lefties moaned about in Australia, but it worked. It stopped these guys actually coming.
Well, you know, the weakness in the UN, what is it, the UN Refugee Convention, or whatever it is that trickles down to you know, laws in Australia, laws across the West, is once a quote unquote asylum seeker sets foot in your country, you can't kick them out until you process their claims. So when we were picking up these migrants offshore, we'd take them to these. We had deals with Papua New Guinea and Nauru, from memory. We'd actually take them to a third country and drop them off there, so they could try to claim asylum in Nauru if they really wanted. But there's not a lot there, so it's not an overly attractive proposition. But we kept them we kept them offshore until we could process their claim and deny it effectively. So that goes to what you were saying about the Ascension Islands. You know, you need to. There's a weakness in the asylum seeker laws that is obviously being exploited by some organised people, right? So, in my view, what I like to see Australia do at least is withdraw from that UN convention, set up our own asylum seeker laws. If you really got to insist on having them, that removes that weakness. I think from memory, Hungary was doing something similar where they set up a chain link fence, 50 meters or whatever it was, inside the border with a gate on it. So when the migrants got into the country, they'd push them out that gate. They'd still be in Hungary, but they couldn't get back in either. So they'd eventually wander off somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I the reason I've always said that Ascension would be a good solution for UK for illegal immigrants. It's not going to do anything about the legal immigrants, as you said, but illegal immigrants, it would be a good solution because it's a British island, so you know they're on British territory. No one at the UN can say jack shit about that. Nobody lives on Ascension Island. It's basically just a big volcanic military base, and fine, you know. Leave them there, and then when eventually their claims are hopefully denied, they'll be sent back where they came from, or to France. I don't really care either way personally, but I certainly think that would be the same thing for the UK to do. I'm not expecting them to do it, mind you, because I don't think the UK is very sane at the moment, or at least the British government leadership isn't.
No, you've got to have an appetite to do these things, Duke, and I think we all know that Boris Johnson wants as many migrants as they can get, you know, whether they be Hong Kongers or any other type.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a totally different issue. But I mean, UK is too full to take 300,000 Chinese guys from Hong Kong. It's just too full. It's too crowded. I mean, Victoria is bigger than the UK, I believe, or certainly at least about the same size. You know?
Yeah, I've heard that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just crazy, Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. So there are parts of England certainly that are more overcrowded than parts of India in terms of bodies per hectare.
Well, the thing is, mate, they don't care. They'll just build up. So one of the things that's happened to the Melbourne suburbs over the course of my life was about 10, 15 years ago, they removed height restrictions on the size of number of stories of dwellings you could have in the suburbs effectively.
Uh-huh.
So you started seeing these old typical Australian single story 3-4 bedroom homes get knocked down and have these three 2-story townhouses built on them. So they'll do the same in the UK, and there's a lot of money to be made in doing that from the building industry too, which I think is one of the donors to the Tory party. So it seems like everyone's a winner except the typical Englishman.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to let people don't know, like Australia typically, your houses in the suburbs were on like a quarter acre block traditionally. So you had a big garden and you had a big kind of bungalow 1-story house. And it was nice, it was a nice lifestyle.
Yeah, Melbourne, the eastern suburbs in Melbourne in the mid-90s when I grew up, mate, it's hard to find better suburbia anywhere in the world, I'd say. But, the pockets of that still exist, but it is changing because, like I said, they're knocking down. So with those quarter-acre blocks, they're big enough to accommodate 2 or even 3, 2 or 3 bedroom townhouses that are sort of built up. So all these old Australian family homes are starting to get knocked down and replaced.
Yeah, I think it's a tragedy, man. I mean, like, the Australian lifestyle, when you look at some of the old documentaries and stuff they used to make in the 50s, like when they were trying to encourage the £5 poms and all this kind of stuff, and you look at these beautiful Australian houses in the 1950s on a quarter-acre block and this kind of stuff, you can just imagine some guy coming from the UK with his family, and it's just a total step change of lifestyle, apart from the better weather and all the rest of it,
Yeah. Well, the only suburbia I've seen that could compare is actually in Canada. Are you familiar with Burlington in Ontario?
I'm not familiar with that, but I have been most to the GTA suburbs, Toronto suburbs, and all I can say for them is they all look the same, both in terms of their buildings and their people. And by people, I mean you'd think the suburbs is a stereotypical white area, but no, they're just as full of immigrants as the main cities are now. I gotta say though, I'm not a fan of suburbs. I don't know. I find they're too repetitive. It kind of reminds me of like a nicer version of the sort of Soviet Khrushchev apartments, because they're all the same. The buildings are all the same. The businesses are all the same. Like you don't find mom and pop shops in suburbs. So I've never been a fan of suburbs.
Yeah, what I think you're referring to there is like the area where I live now that was built in the 60s, 70s. There is, to use a dirty word, diversity in terms of the type of houses and the way the streets are laid and all that sort of thing. But what they're building now, Duke, as you know, in Melbourne, and particularly out west and in Cranbourne Way, is just these run-of-the-mill, every house is the same suburbs that are getting built out of paddocks, and that's where the migrants tend to go live as well. So yeah, there is a bit of difference there, Armin, that you'll come to know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, suburbs. I remember the London suburbs when I was a kid, because one of my grandparents lived in Bromley, which in those days was a quite pleasant, leafy and green suburb. And because I lived in the middle of London, I was always very happy to go to my grandmother's place, who lived in Bromley, because she had this great.
Yeah, I mean, to be
Everywhere,
honest,
loads of birds. Sorry,
yeah,
carry
to be
on.
honest, no, I was going to say what we're talking about is sort of the thing that sort of led me down the path towards becoming a nationalist. You know, because I grew up in this typical Australian suburbia environment, and with the two income trap and migration just going up and up and up, it really squeezed people. It's squeezing people like me out of the market.
Mm. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, look, even where I live now, like I live in a suburb, and the suburb I live in at the moment, I would say was mostly probably built in the 60s, but it's still mostly single-story buildings. And there's like loads and loads of parakeets and parrots and lorikeets and there's loads of bird life. I can walk to places where there are cows and horses. I can walk to places where there are wallabies if I go out early in the morning or late in the evening. And like, I'm an old bastard. Okay, I'm 55, and my son's in his 20s. He's a grown-up guy, and he's serving in the Royal Navy. But if I was wanting to like have a family now, I would far rather live somewhere like where I am now than in the middle of a city. You know, it would be a much more healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, it's no mystery as to why birth rates are dropping amongst Westerners, because they just don't have the bedrooms to put the kids in. It tend to be that if you had a 4 or 5 bedroom house like the old days, then you'd fill them with kids. But the married couples these days, they living in a townhouse, 2 or 3 bedrooms, it's tiny, it's cramped. They just don't have the room to have 3, 4 kids.
And the missus is probably spending most of her time at work because you need that second income to be able to afford it.
Yeah, well, I was lucky to avoid that. I deliberately bought so I wouldn't get caught in that 2 income trap.
Mm. But most people haven't. I mean, and I think the generations younger than you, Joe, are even in a worse position than you are. In that regard. Sorry, Joe, I'm saying that maybe people who are younger than you are even in a worse position in terms of like trying to get onto the housing ladder and all that kind of stuff,
Well, even some of my friends at my generation, and I'm not that old, but the manufacturing. It used to be in Australia that the bloke without a college education could get a job in a Toyota factory or wherever it was, and with a bit of overtime, he could afford to, buy his bit of the suburbs and raise a family. But they just can't do that now.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think it's exactly the same in Canada, as far as I know. Like, I have had over the years a few Canadian friends. Like, I had a very good mate who was an ex-Canadian Army guy, and they've said to me exactly the same thing. Like, you used to be able to have a good lifestyle in suburban places around big Canadian cities, and you can't do it anymore because you can't afford it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, before I started university, I worked for a year. It was just minimum wage, mind you. I could have made a lot more money if I did something else, but I just wanted to stay in my area. So I did a minimum wage job, not full time, whatever. By the end of it, I ended up having around, how much would I have made? Maybe 12K in that year. But I've heard accounts in the past, in the 50s, where it's like if you worked over the summertime, you could buy a full house, and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not like, you'd probably have to pay with the down payment, but even still, it'd be super easy. And with me, I'm looking around like I could, if with that money I have, I could barely buy a very small house in my rural area, which is dying and drying up. I could barely maybe buy one, let alone sustain it once I have the thing. So, and there's not many jobs around here too, right? Like a lot of them are minimum wage, part-time things. You'll get a few good jobs, but not many. So if you were to stay in the area, you're kind of screwed in terms of money. So you're kind of forced to go to the city, actually, if you want to have any sort of prospects for the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, it's hard to get a house though here if you were to want one.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, Jobu may or may not agree with me, but I think the biggest problem, well, one of the biggest problems in Australia is that, like, if you're a rural Australia, I mean, in the outback, but not even just in the outback, just in the countryside, there's not much work.
Yeah, that's right.
Half your problem. Yeah.
If you want to move to a country town, you've got to you're either going to work on a farm, or if the town's already got a plumber, you're screwed.
Yeah.
There's just not the It would be nice to move out to the country, but there's just the jobs just aren't out there. And it's particularly for white collar workers as well. It's just not an option.
And this is actually one of the reasons what I really hate about free market conservative movements is that they don't really, I mean, for one, it goes against conservative beliefs as far as I'm concerned. But secondly, it's very short-sighted in how they're kind of viewing the future. Because if they're like, one of the main arguments they say is, oh, well, you should just move then. You're not being innovative or whatever, sort of that capitalistic free market mindset. Well, it's like, if you want everyone to move to the cities, then can you really say you're a conservative? Because, I mean, that's just going to liberalize more people over time. A lot of people don't care too much about politics. They'll just passively take things in. That's going to create a lot more liberals in the future. As far as I'm concerned, if you're a real conservative, you should be trying to make it so it's easier for people to stay in sort of the rural areas, because not only is that going to create more conservative people, more conservative voters, but as far as I'm concerned, it's just an inherently conservative value. Conservatism used to be big into big government, and it was always the liberals that were trying to go against that with free market sort of economics. And for some reason, that paradigm switched in the West at some point. But it does anger me in a sense, because I mentioned this before. If I walk down the road, I could go to a family grave with people there since like the 1800s. I can look at the family names and know most of them. And the closer to the now you get, the less graves there are, meaning there's less people, and there's less people dying here, which is actually a bad thing, because if there's more people dying, it means there's more people being born, right? So if you're a real conservative, as far as I'm concerned, you should try and subsidize rural living and make it easier so people can stay in areas where they have a history, and that's a real conservative value as far as I'm concerned.
What we're talking about here is it's a bit of a meme in our circles, but the line in the graph's always got to go up. And the establishment parties on both sides, really, but definitely with the Conservatives, they measure everything in GDP growth. And GDP growth just measures, as you guys know, it just measures the size of your economy. It doesn't tell you what's happening within it. So in Australia, we've had flat wage growth for 15 years now. So GDP's gone up, but it's not trickling down to blokes like you and me, Duke. No, it's across the same thing across the West. So a real conservative movement should move away from that. The GDP going up in general is a good thing, but if that's not benefiting the citizenry at large, then we need to look at other alternative policies.
Well, including just. Sorry, mate. Carry on.
I was going to say, it's one of the reasons I'm disenfranchised with the Liberal Party here is it seems like their sole focus, to the detriment of anything else, is keeping house prices afloat to keep the housing bubble going. That is all they care about.
Well, it's huge in Australia. Keeping the housing prices going up is huge in Australia. It really is. I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, look, if you're going to have mass border immigration, it's absolutely going to push down wages, particularly for the less skilled people. And it's absolutely going to push up housing costs. Whether you're buying a house or you're renting a house, if you've got mass border immigration, it's going to push down wages. And at the same time, it's going to push up housing costs, which is obviously bad for most ordinary average people.
And I think immigration restrictionists here need to do a better job of explaining that to people. There's a bit of a dog whistle in there too when you talk about immigration, and that's fine. But they don't tend to articulate to people, okay, the reason why we want to restrict immigration is because we want you to be able to afford to buy a house. We want you to get good jobs, good wage growth, and be able to raise a family. Is that such a bad thing?
Well, I mean, look at Australia in the period between, say, 1960 and 1990. Like, real wages went up a lot. They went up a lot.
I mean, all I can go off is charts, but it would seem that would be the period where things were starting to slow down, really. It would seem like any time before that it was keeping up, and then that's when it sort of started slowing down a little bit.
Well, I don't know about in Canada. I mean, you might be right in Canada, but certainly in Australia, like between about 1960 and probably 90s too late, probably about 1980, 85, Australia was doing damn well.
Okay, well, maybe I'm wrong. I wouldn't know Australia.
The other metric you got to look at as well, Armin, is back in those days, it was the price of a house was 3 by the average wage, right? Whereas now it's about 10 times the average wage. So
huge difference.
Yeah. So you can get your 2% a year wage growth, but if the housing prices are skyrocketing like that, you're stuck nowhere.
Actually, I'm going to use this opportunity to speak to some of the young people watching the cast like me. That's one of the most biggest important things you could use with your money is just buying property in general, but buying a house or whatever, and not even necessarily for yourself. But what I'm trying to do right now in my life is I'm trying to get together with a few friends that I can really trust. Not just casual friends that you just joke around with. Like friends that you have like a real connection to. What I've been trying to do lately is I've realized that we're getting more and more individualistic. More like studies show more and more people are becoming more isolated. Families are breaking apart. All this sorts of things. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get together with a few friends that I can really trust and kind of create what I kind of call it's kind of a quasi family unit. I want to be so bonded with them that we trust each other financially completely. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it so that we can use our economic power together to start buying properties and the goal is to hopefully start flipping houses and renting things. But in the West, I think that's the only real way you can start doing things now is by working with people that you trust, at least to get started. Because there's no way I could do this on myself at the moment. I could work for 5 years and maybe finally get enough, but I'm not doing that. 5 years is too long. That's like over 5% of my life. So I mean,
sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm 55, mate. Honestly, trust me, 5 years ain't no more.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I wish I had your problems, mate. But
you think 5 years is a long time when you're a young fella, but it really ain't, mate.
Yeah, if you can get into your own house in this day and age by the time you're 25, you're doing pretty well.
No, but I'm not even thinking like in terms of that. Like my thinking is like, okay, so I'm about 20. Let's round it off. Okay, that's already 20% of my life gone. Actually, over 20%. Then when I'm by the age 65, maybe 70, I'll basically, I can do financial things, but I'll basically be physically able to not do much. So that's basically wasted life too. That's just enjoyment years. So that's another, let's say, 20% of your life useless. That leaves me 60% of my life to do actually useful things, quote unquote. 5% of that 60% remaining, that matters a lot because in the first few years, that's where you're trying to develop. The latter half of that 60% of the rest of my life, that's just living off of whatever I can make myself. So it's these first few years that really matter. Like this 20% tiny portion of my life right now, that's what matters for setting up my future.
Armin, excuse me for saying so, you have to multitask, mate. You don't just say I'm doing this and I'm not doing anything else. You can be doing that stuff to get yourself into a position to get yourself on the housing ladder or whatever the hell it might be. But you can do other things at the same time.
Like in terms of what? Like, do you mean in terms of enjoying myself, or in terms of doing other things with my money? Like what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you can do other things in terms of enjoying yourself. Certainly, like take holidays, like me, a good chick, and have a family and all this kind of stuff. But also, you can do things like talk to people like you are now. There's no reason you can't do this at the same time as you're doing that. If you see what I mean.
Oh no, of course I'm not saying that I need to work like a workaholic. I'm not right now. I'm in university, which is like a technically a bad financial decision. I'm not here for financial reasons, but anyways, yeah, of course. I mean, I can spend my free time on many things, but likewise, there's many things you can do in life that are free or that are very cheap to enjoy yourself. Like my hobbies are walking, reading books, talking like this. Stuff like this is free or cheap. So I mean, I haven't spent much money actually in like a whole year at all. Basically, last year when I was working, the only thing I really bought over that year was books, like just my own personal books in thrift stores, and that's all I bought really because I live at home. So I guess that's another good thing is like you should live at home as much as you can, you know. And I don't like that conservative thing too. It's like, oh, move out of the house, take your own responsibility. It's like, no. If you look at the traditional families in Europe, like the South Italians and that, they always emphasize stay with your family until you get married or whatever, until you get established. And I kind of agree with that. You should stay with your family as long as possible because, I mean, one, if you're to claim you're conservative, then you really are doing that with the whole family value thing. But two, you're not going to get established otherwise, you know. Even if you use the whole free market conservative thing, that's the only way you're going to get established to get ahead.
Well,
it's a trade-off. It's definitely a trade-off. Look, I moved out of home when I was 22, and I paid a lot of money in rent. I had a lot of fun as well. But yeah, I guess like it probably set me back a couple of years in terms of when I could buy a house. But I wouldn't have traded it for anything, mate. If I could say so, you're probably overcharting your life at this point. If you're only 20, mate, you've got a long way to go. I'm in my late 30s, and it feels like an eternity ago I was your age, mate. So if I was to give you some advice, it'd just be put money aside. Doesn't matter how much it is, but just put money aside whenever you can. So when you are ready to turn the page and actually buy a bit of property, that you're in the best position you can be.
Yeah, I'd say that was good advice too. I'm even older than Jobo is. So, yeah. I don't know. I think it's very easy when you're young because I remember doing it myself. You know, you're young and you think, oh my God, I'm like 21 or whatever, and soon I'll be 25, and after that I'll be 30, and that time does go very quickly. It does, but only in retrospect.
I mean, yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to do anything in the next few years anyways. I am just sort of saying save money as much as you can.
Yeah, always a good idea. That's always a good idea. I mean, the other thing I was going to talk about, and I've talked about on other streams, and I want to do again, is I think a lot of guys go to university who would actually be better off doing a trade in many respects.
I'm going to agree with that, even though I am a university kid. And I'm just going to say that because a lot of people do come into university because they think it's going to set them up for the future with a job. For me, this is purely a passion thing, right? Like, I actually like learning about the shit I do. You know, I'm big into philosophy and stuff. But I will agree, there's not much of a practical reason you should join this stuff. You should only join it if you really have a passion for it. And, you know, and by the sides for me anyways, you know, to sound like a bit of a Jew here, I mean, I'm basically paying nothing in university anyways. I mean, the government's pretty good with that, even with the conservatives in, I mean. So it's not that expensive. If I was to live on my own, I guess it would cost a bit. I could work a little to make up for that. But yeah, if you're joining university for the money, then you're doing things wrong.
Yeah, and the other thing too that you don't realise at the time, like, without trying to dox myself, like I'm a sort of mid-rank globo homo, if you like, in Australia, and I didn't have a uni degree or anything, and I've just sort of joined a place many moons ago and worked my way up. But what you don't sort of understand is that the corporate environment in itself is very, very toxic, and you're dealing with spurgs day in, day out. The place is packed to the rafters with assholes, and if I had my time again, I'd probably become a Sparky, you know.
Yeah,
I've got friends that do that, and they get to drive around all day, see different people, do different jobs, and they're happy, you know.
Yeah. I mean, Australia, in particular, the tradie is like a big deal. You know, he's the guy who runs his own business. As Jobu was saying, goes to different places every day, does stuff, sorts out problems, and if you're good at it, you can get yourself a damn good business. You know, start employing people, all this kind of stuff.
And the other thing too is, mate, it's a skill that no one can take away from you. You know, if current trends continue, then that's going to become more and more valuable, you know, as more and more jobs get shipped out.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, like you're saying, Sparks, which is an electrician, bloody plumbers, bricklayers, all sorts of people like that, who there is no way that automation is going to replace. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they'll be fixing the machines, mate. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, right? So I don't know how long you've been in Australia, Duke, but I remember back like
21 years, mate.
Yeah. So were you here for Hawke Keating?
No, I missed him. I came over and I met an Australian chick in South Africa in the beginning of 2020. And that's how I ended up in Australia.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking back recently because of the big political themes at the time that sort of stick in your mind. Like even I was on the All Out at the time, obviously, but it was with Keating and for the guys in the chat was a left wing economic reformer, bit of a proto globalist, I guess you might describe him as. Mm-hmm. And he used to run around talking about, we've got to be part of Asia. We've got to break away from the old empire. We can't have the Queen as a head of state. Blah blah blah. And that's when Australia really started to pivot to China in the early 90s. And then that was followed up by Howard as multiculturalism. And the way that was sold to us at the time was, we're going to lose a lot of manufacturing jobs. We're going to become a knowledge economy. So we'll be all boffins and doctors and lawyers and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, over the last 10, 15 years, and this is what I've seen from my vantage point in working life, is all the knowledge jobs are being shipped offshore too, or they're shipping in Indians to do it. So you've got to really, like when I have kids and they come of age, mate, I'll be pushing them towards doing a trade because, like I said, you'll have a skill that no one can take away from you, and you sort of unhook yourself from the political fates of whoever's run the country into the ground at the time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, like the Australian chick who I met in South Africa, she was a nurse with a master's degree from Newcastle University, and in New South Wales, and she was absolutely from a working class background. Very bright woman, but like she grew up in Australia where, as you were saying, Joe, there were big car manufacturing plants and quite a lot of industry, which has mostly just disappeared over the last 20 years, really.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that the Kung Flu changes that a little bit. As you guys must know, Australia's in a bit of a trade war and diplomatic spat with China at the moment. Yep,
it is.
I think they've singled us out as someone to really put the screws to try to prevent, an exodus of manufacturing from China. But I'd like to see a lot of that come back. And like I've got friends that work in call centres, and they're not overly ambitious. And that's as far as they're going to rise. But like I said before, like if we get high value manufacturing back, then they've got an opportunity to change their lives.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all. Well, I mean, on that subject, which is something I've talked about a bit on other streams, HMS Queen Elizabeth, the British Royal Navy aircraft carrier, is going to be arriving in Australia later this year, and it's actually now true, which I'm pleased about because my son's going to be an officer on that ship. So I'm going to be heading up to Sydney to meet him because I doubt it's going to come to Melbourne, sadly. But I'm certainly going to Sydney to meet him. And that's going to be the biggest Royal Navy deployment since the Falklands War. So there we go. And that's about China. That's about China and free navigation in the South China Sea and all this kind of stuff.
Well, one of the things. Sorry, you go ahead, mate. I saw you came off here then.
Oh no, I was just gonna put a little comment. Is just hopefully China pisses off Australia one too many times, and hopefully the Aussies do start actually seriously considering the sort of Kansuk economic union that Brexiters were.
I think that's already happened. I think that's already happened. Like Australia is not very happy with China at the moment.
But like the question is like angry enough to consider Kansuk, basically. I mean, you can be pissed off and not do anything about it, right? I mean, let's just hope they get pissed off enough to actually really consider that.
I don't know. Jobo, what do you reckon about that, mate?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that, mate. So the first thing about this whole thing is I remember an old CEO of ours when the company was in this shit at the time, and he came out and said something interesting, and it's he likened his efforts to turn the company around to like trying to turn around the Titanic. You know, it's you can't just turn on a dime. It takes time to change direction and then move off into where you want to get to. And I think that's going to be the case with manufacturing. I don't think it's going to happen in 1, 2, or 3 years. I think what we've seen is a paradigm shift, and it's going to play out over 10, 15 years. And one of my thoughts that I'll put to you guys is I haven't seen talked about anywhere is I actually see this coronavirus issue and the exposure of the West's reliance on China and the fact that it can all go to shit pretty quickly. I actually see that as an existential threat potentially for the Chinese Communist Party, in that, okay, they've got the world's manufacturing there basically at the moment, but not all of it has to leave China and come back to us or go to Vietnam or India or any other place. If 40 to 50% of that manufacturing activity gets shipped out of China, their economy is going to collapse. And then the Communist Chinese Party then face an angry population that could, in a revolutionary country, do a revolution.
Yeah,
I don't. People always talk up the fact that we're relying on China, but people don't also point out that they're relying on us. They're relying on us leaving our manufacturing there and not incentivizing companies to bring it back. And it doesn't all have to come back. They can make all the rubber duckies and water pistols and hula hoops that they want for us, but anything higher value than that, if they lose that, I reckon they're in big trouble.
Well, I listen. I'm no expert on economics at all. Like the thing I've always studied is military and naval history, and I would say that if China wants to kick off in the South China Sea, which I think they do, I think the government does. Like they want to take over Taiwan, for example. If there is a relatively strong alliance between the US and Australia and Japan and the UK, and possibly even India and South Korea, I think the Chinese are going to be very unstuck. Like they're growing, they're becoming more powerful, but at the moment and for the next few years, if there was a naval and air war in the South China Sea, they're damn well going to lose.
Yeah, well, it's something I wanted to put. I was looking forward to putting to you, Duke. So, as far as I know, the Chinese have 2 carriers. I think they're ex-Russian at the moment, and
yeah,
the Americans
they're both ship. They're both ship.
Yeah, and America's got 11 carrier fleets, if I'm not mistaken. So
I think it's more. Well, look, actually, I think it's 10, and it's more like 8 that are actually operational at any one time. But yeah. So look, I've read a little bit about the Battle of Midway, and as you know, in that battle, which was the first over the horizon only battle where the no, Coral Sea was. But
Coral Sea, Battle of the Coral Sea, yeah, right,
yeah.
But anyway, the point I'm driving at is I've heard it described by Victor Davis Hanson that after Midway, when we sank or the Yanks sank their carriers, Japan effectively lost the war because they lost the ability to project naval power. So it was just the mopping up exercise in that point in the Pacific, and then obviously we dropped the bombs. But bringing it to China, like my theory is, and I'm not a Navy man, but we could dispatch their 2 carriers pretty quickly, and then they'll lose. They can have as many islands in the South China Sea as they like, but they're going to lose the ability to project force into the sea, and then that's all she wrote. I can't imagine we're going to invade China. No one's got an appetite for that, but.
No, that would be idiotic.
I don't fear
that would be idiotic. Yeah.
I don't fear a skirmish with China.
Rudy, sorry, that's my little cross-check Russell dog, who generally makes an appearance on my streams. One day I'm going to put his picture on here, I think. But anyway, yeah, no, I agree totally. A naval air war, China's not going to win. And they might win it in 15 years' time, but that's every reason not to allow it to go to 15 years' time before you have it, which is what I think is going to happen. So, yeah. But the other thing I think is that, you're looking at a Royal Navy task group arriving in Australia sometime towards the latter part of this year. And that's going to be a QE class carrier plus a couple of Type 45 air defense destroyers and a couple of Type 23 anti-submarine frigates and a British nuclear hunter-killer submarine plus Royal Fleet auxiliaries and all that stuff. I hope that actually might give a bit of a kick up the arse to the whole Tanzuk thing, which I think would be a good deal, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I don't know if this is realistic or not, but I'd like to see us just float a flotilla through those islands just to tell Z to fuck off, basically.
Well, certainly there are certainly going to be Australian warships joining the Royal Navy Task Force, same as they're going to be American ships joining it and Japanese ships. So yeah, absolutely, I totally agree with that, and I think China is not in a position to do very much about it at the moment. If we wait 10 or 15 years, they might be, but I don't think they are now.
Yeah, I had a thought the other day that I'd never had thought before when I was thinking about this stuff, and with Biden in the White House, and the way that the globalists are taking control over there, basically, if there was to be China was to push down towards Australia, I'm a lot less certain that the Yanks would come to our aid, to be honest. There'd be a lot of, not to say that they wouldn't, but there'd be a lot of globalists that suddenly become isolationists in that country, given their reliance for their business operations on China.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, this is why, like all Australian politicians, or sensible ones anyway, which is to say the non-Labor ones, are in favor of protecting Taiwan. Like if China takes Taiwan and America doesn't do anything, that is a really bad signal to every single one of America's allies in this part of the world. Like it really is. Like you can't trust the Yanks, basically, is what everyone's going to think. Now, that won't matter to New Zealand because I'm not saying there are not many good patriotic New Zealanders, particularly in the Royal New Zealand Navy, but the New Zealand Premier, that vile bitch, is absolutely pro-China as far as I can work out.
Yeah, a little fun fact for the for the Brits listening to the stream, she was a policy advisor to Tony Blair back in the day, so you can just imagine what she's like.
Yeah, what a surprise. The biggest, vilest traitor in British history. Yeah, right. Great.
Did you see her jumping up and down the other day because we cancelled that ISIS bride terrorist person's dual citizenship?
Oh, didn't moves. Yeah. She also introduced like probably the worst and most lax abortion laws in the whole of the Western world, very quietly while all this China virus bullshit was going on. Because she is, of course, a feminist as well. Intersectional feminist.
I don't know what it is with those people and killing babies, mate, but they cannot get enough of it.
No, they just love it. They just love it. I don't know. I like I said, I hope the Royal Navy Task Group coming down this part of the world will be a good thing. I'm certainly looking forward to going and meeting my boy when they pull into Sydney. And hopefully getting a bit of a tour of HMS Queen Elizabeth, which would be nice. But yeah, and Australia has actually done a pretty good job of keeping her Navy pretty strong. The Royal Australian Navy is, it ain't bad at the moment for the size of the country.
Yeah, you don't hear too much about it, to be honest. Like last I heard it, like it dominating the news was there's some sort of fiasco with the Collins-class submarines, if I recall correctly. Yeah,
that was a bit exaggerated. They eventually got the Collins class into a pretty good working order. They work pretty good now. I'm not at all sure about why Australia is planning to buy heaps of submarines from the French. If I was going to buy submarines, like conventional submarines, from somebody, that it would probably be either the Japanese or the Germans. It probably wouldn't be the French, to be honest. But I don't know. I'm sure there are trade deals going on there and all that kind of stuff.
Are the Germans even still good with their subs? I mean, a lot of their military became very mediocre after World War II.
No. The German submarines are absolutely some of the best conventional submarines. And the Japanese also have very good conventional submarines. You guys in Canada actually bought 4 British conventional submarines, which the Royal Navy really badly wanted, but Tony Blair decided to flog because he wanted to spend all the money on useless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't even know why we pissed off Afghanistan with stuff like that. I mean, yeah, that was just a waste.
Hey, there's a reason my son is not in the army, and it's partly because I was really fed up with absolutely pointless wars that we had no plan or no intention of winning, that were just causing loads of dead and wounded guys, and that goes for UK and Canada and Australia, for no purpose whatever. No purpose. We were never going to win anything there. It was just complete. I would be vomiting constantly if my son had got killed in that war.
But Duke, don't you realise how important it is to make sure that Afghani girls get an education?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah, I do. Yeah,
sure I've been hearing that shit I've been hearing that shit for 20 years.
Yeah,
I could care less.
It's fucking ridiculous, mate. And it's even worse. Like in Australia, I mean, recently, I don't know if you heard, there was a couple of Aussie soldiers who were trying to get prosecuted because they supposedly shot somebody through a window who wasn't a Taliban guy when they were under fire.
Is that the guy that won the VC? They've been going on last year or two.
I don't know if it was the guy who won the VC, but I know there were 2 Australian Special Forces blokes, and they came under fire from some Taliban guys, and they fired through a window and killed someone who was not a Taliban. Which, you know, if you come under fire and you're firing back, that's fucking liable to happen. You know, excuse my language.
Don't put them there in the first place if you don't want that stuff to happen.
Yeah, you know, and you can't blame troops for that shit. But apparently, you know, if you're Tony Blair, you can get thousands and thousands and thousands of people killed, and you can get great jobs with the UN and the rest of it. But if you're a British or an Australian private and you do something slightly wrong, you should get prosecuted.
Yeah, I've heard of some pretty strict things in the American military when it came to how different parts of the military cooperated together. Like, I was this person from some sort of helicopter battalion. I don't know what they're in. Anyways, he was in the helicopters, and he was saying how hard it was to like call for support or whatever between the actually ground infantry and the helicopters for them to work together, because they didn't want to like have any civilian casualties at all. And so the terrorists always use that, of course, because they're going to use that to their full advantage, knowing that that's basically a shield for them never to be attacked. So yeah, they'll like fully have civilians all over with them so that they can't get attacked all the while they're shooting at you. And you can do nothing about it because you don't want to get, you know, court-martialed or whatever if you disobey.
Yeah, well, after the USA and the UK, Canada actually had the 3rd highest casualties in Afghanistan out of any of the coalition nations.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I've considered the military too for a while. I'm still kind of considering it, but I wouldn't really want to go to some random war like that. Of course, I mean, okay, well, one hand, I guess it'd be kind of good for discipline, but at the same time, it's like, I don't really want to risk dying. I kind of feel like if I had more siblings, I would be more willing to risk my life, but being an only child, I'm not so willing to risk my life because, you know, there's no one else after me, basically. So, you know.
Well, all my family were military, like going back to at least my great grandfather in like 1900, pretty much. And my son is serving in the Royal Navy. So there was never any choice that I was going to join the military. But I put my boy off joining the army, and indeed the Royal Marines. Basically because I just didn't like the pointless casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. And luckily, from my point of view, his mother came from a Royal Navy family, so, you know.
Do you have any insight into the Coast Guards?
Yeah, that'd be good. I think they're pretty good.
I mean, it's somewhat laughed about by the other military branches, but it seems like it has pretty good benefits. And I mean, you're basically staying in the country anyway. So.
Well, they say the American Coast Guard, which is the only one I know much about, actually spends most of its time saving lives. So I certainly think that's okay. I presume Canada's Coast Guard would be much the same, plus doing a bit of fisheries protection and this kind of stuff. Shouldn't think it would be a bad thing to do.
Did you see that video of the Colombian Coast Guard getting one of those narc subs and opening it up right when it was trying to flee?
Nah, I didn't. I don't pay much attention to navies doing stuff about drugs because I think it's irrelevant, to be honestly. Honestly, I think it's like navies doing stuff about drugs. Don't care. If you can stop the people wanting the drugs, that'd be great. But I don't think you can. So I really don't care about navies doing stuff to stop drugs.
No, I agree. I don't really care about the whole drug war as a whole, but it was just a very interesting video because, I mean, for one, you got to see a pretty close up of what a narc sub looks like, which it isn't technically a real sub. It only goes just under the surface. But
yeah, it's a semi-submersible. I've seen them. I don't know. Look, I tell you what I'd say to you, Armin, is Canada had a damn good navy in World War II. I think they've still got a very good navy. Like, I used to know a lot of people who spent years and years campaigning to get the Royal Canadian Navy back, because you guys used to have this unified armed forces bollocks. And everybody hated it, pretty much. And the Royal Canadian Navy people spent ages and ages and ages, and they finally succeeded. And like now, the Royal Canadian Navy is a thing again. And I think that's a good idea. So I totally support that.
okay, yeah, I'll definitely consider that then.
Canadian Navy had a damn good. There was a good video that a guy called Drachmafel, who does great videos on mostly World War II and World War One and earlier periods. He did this great video. Two Royal Canadian Navy sailors in World War II captured a U-boat on their own, and one of them was naked. But you have to go and watch the video. It's actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good. Also, the Royal Canadian Navy has the last surviving tribal class destroyer in the world, and the last surviving flower class corvette in the world, and they're both museum ships in Australia. So yeah, there you go.
I'll have to look into that story you mentioned later.
Oh shit, man! If you wanted to, I could do a whole video about museum ships I've been to all over the bloody place, and quite a lot in Australia too. There's some good museum ships in Australia, but yeah.
Doesn't England, or rather the UK, still have the world's oldest ship? I forget what it is now. Still technically in service or whatever. Like mostly just for tourists, but.
No, that's not true. HMS Victory is the world's oldest commissioned warship, and she's not just for tourists. She's actually the flagship of Portsmouth Command Admiral. She's the oldest commissioned warship in the world.
Oh, actually, wait, I just Googled. Apparently the USS Constitution is, but...
No, she's the oldest floating commissioned warship in the world. But the oldest commissioned warship in the world is HMS Victory.
Yeah, all right. I mean, I don't know much about Navy stuff anyway. Fair enough.
Yeah, navies are cool, man. But yeah, absolutely. And also in World War II, the Canadian troops got themselves in a little bit of a private war of an SS division in Normandy. And the Canadians did not lose. True story. Anyway, guys, we're going down the history thing, which is like I'm happy to do history streams, but this is not a history stream. So, Armin, what would you like particularly to bring up? Maybe about Canada, but about anything in particular?
Wow. What would I be interested in talking about? Well, let's see. We went over how the party systems are in Australia and Canada. We went over how the economics has changed over the years. We've talked about demographics to an extent. I'm always interested in how Native affairs are. How's that like in Australia?
Well, I don't want to be too unkind, but the Aborigines down here are pretty much savages. Duke, is that a tough but fair way to describe native cousins? Yeah, so look, I guess Armin, the way I describe it is the liberal sort of left like to see Aborigines live as museum pieces, and what I mean by that is they live. Australia's a big continent, obviously, and the Aboriginals live hundreds and hundreds of kilometres into the interior in little townships that we've built for them, with no jobs, no prospects, and a lot of social problems. So they can't handle the drink, they sniff petrol, and they destroy themselves effectively. Incest, domestic violence, and all the rest of it. And the answer always seems to be sending more and more money their way, and it doesn't help them, and it doesn't help us. I don't think there's a lot of white guilt involved in the whole thing. There was a scandal dating back to the 1920s, I think, where it's referred to as the stolen generation, where you had a lot of domestic violence happening in Aboriginal communities, and the response of the government at the time was to, like what would happen with white kids in the suburbs, they removed them from the abusive living situations and brought them into orphanages and foster homes and all the rest of it. And that's been turned into a scandal called the Stolen Generation, which is another white guilt sort of something to be used as leverage against the Australian population.
That sounds, that sounds exactly like the Native story in Canada right now with all the white guilt. But the difference being is, you're either dirt poor as a Native and you do that sort of a thing, or you're rich off of all the tobacco you can sell and that people go to the reserves for, the casinos and stuff. So you're either really poor or really rich as a Native here. I'm not gonna lie, I've always heard of this sort of stereotype of them huffing gas and doing all these things. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's worse out west in Canada. Me more being in the east, I haven't seen it, but apparently it's like really bad in Manitoba, and that even in the cities they take up a big part of the gang culture apparently. But again, I haven't been there, so I wouldn't know. Actually, in Nunavut, to this day, alcohol is still illegal there, and that's partially because the Inuit councils or whatever they want it to stay legal actually. So yeah, the prohibition is still technically alive in North America if you go to the Nunavut.
Yeah, we've got it down here too. We call them dry areas, and yeah, you're basically not allowed to bring alcohol into some of these Indigenous communities because everyone knows what's going to happen if you do.
For exactly the same reason as in Canada, because these guys can't handle alcohol.
Yeah, the firewater.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Like I used to live on Thursday Island. I lived on Thursday Island for a couple of years, which is in the Torres Strait between like the top end of Australia and New Guinea. And I had a lot of jobs there. Like my chick was running most of the hospital because she was the best qualified nurse they had up there because you couldn't get well qualified nurses to stay there for long. And I had a number of jobs. I worked for the Torres Marine pilots, putting guys on and off ships. I worked for the combined barracks up there, like the military, naval and military barracks, just to go and clean that occasionally. I used to run the hospital car when the Torres Strait Islander normally did it, went down south for a funeral, because when a Torres Strait Islander goes down south for a funeral, he goes for anywhere between 3 and 6 months. And that was like basically to pick up little old ladies from the dock, from the ferry, and run them the 600 or 700 yards up to the hospital. And my other job there was I used to go and there were these absolutely great modern council houses on the place, commission houses, I think is the right term in Australia, that were built for the Torres Strait Islanders, and they were absolutely great, air conditioning and loads of bedrooms and big rooms and high ceilings and blah and blah and blah. And for reasons best known to themselves, the Torres Strait Islanders used to burn them on a regular basis. I don't know why. And like then me and my mates would go in and clean them up so they could use them again. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I've heard of that happening in the some of the Indigenous communities that we build for a mate. We build row upon row of nice houses, and they have a fire in the living room. You know? So.
Yeah, no reason really, but yeah, just burn them down. And like if you were a Torres Strait Islander, you could get the qualification to become a I can't remember the correct term now. I used to know. You could become like a skipper of a boat with you wouldn't pay anything to learn to do that. Fishing boat or a ferry or something like that. You could become a nurse with nothing. Like it wouldn't cost you a penny to become a nurse. There were all sorts of things that if you were a Torres Strait Islander, you could get for free. That if you were a white Australian, would cost you quite a lot of money. And they got all this stuff for free, and hardly any of them took it up.
Yeah, the other thing that's happening down here, Armin, is we're trying to import American racial politics into Australia as well. So the example of that would be Australia Day, which 26th of January, it celebrates the arrival of the first fleet into Botany Bay in New South Wales. The British flag was raised, and the penal colony, the first penal colony, was founded in Australia. So that was the birth of the nation, so to speak. That's over the last 10 years or so. They've been trying to the left have been trying to start this Invasion Day meme. We're all supposed to feel guilty about that day. They want to change the date. Blah blah blah. So it's just another attempt to destroy what I guess are effectively white traditions in Western countries, and that's just the angle of attack they're using here. I'm not sure if you guys get that with the Native Americans up there.
Yeah, no, we definitely get the same, even in my area, because as I've mentioned, I have a lot of family history here. Even here, it's like I've been told by natives and liberals, and I hear the same sort of arguments all over the place, though, is that, oh, you can't be proud of being here as like the settler because we were here first, blah, blah, blah. You can't really have sort of an ethnic identity, basically. You have to have like a civic identity, and even that's kind of frowned upon. I don't know. I just find that very odd as a belief, because at what specific date in history did a migration or a conquest, at what specific year in history did it turn from being morally okay to all of a sudden being morally impermissible and thus not legitimate, I suppose? Because, I mean, I've always been a big fan of history since a kid, and, I look back even to like almost prehistoric times nearly, and it's just like all of history is conquering and moving around, and it's like it seems around the 1800s-ish is when people start frowning upon it and seeing the most recent invasions as all of a sudden being the only case of sort of an illegitimate one. Like, you don't see similar critiques on China sort of settling more and more west into sort of Uyghur territory. Like, you see it now, but like they were doing the same things in the 1800s and that, and you don't sort of see critiques of the Russian expansion into Siberia so much. You might see maybe some finger wagging if they're being a little rude to the natives now, but I mean, in terms of their settlement in the 1600s, you don't see too much critiques on that. You don't see the critiques on the Bantu populations in Africa expanding outside of Central Africa. You don't see that being criticized. So it really raises the question: when did it become bad, and when was it good? And when is it warranting money contributions to make up for it? Like, you don't see the South African I forget what their name is, but the ones that do the clicking languages. You don't see them asking for reparations from the Zulu. They don't do that. They don't ask for reparations for the Zulu conquest, but they were just
That's
the same as the British.
Hey, Armin, that's the Forza. But yeah.
Yeah, the Nosa or whatever.
Yeah, Forza.
Yeah, like the Zulu came in the region around the same time as the British and yet, the Zulu, they're not asked to make reparations, but, they're just much of a conquering people, basically.
But yeah, but listen, it's coincidence. Armin and Jobo, it's coincidence that the native populations in Canada and Australia are being used in exactly the same ways, not so much by the native populations themselves, but by left-wing bastards who hate Australia and Canada. It's just coincidence, man.
No, yeah, that's right. It's just another type of class struggle by the communists, basically, or the Marxists, or whatever you want to call them. So the middle class, the working class in a lot of Western countries sort of got reasonably affluent in terms of the living standards in the 80s and 90s. So that's not going to work. So we're going to have to divide everyone up by race. So, and I think everyone in our circles understands what we're talking about there.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's like when Sitting Bull and the Sioux and the Cheyenne beat the shit out of Custer's 5 companies and pissed off to Canada. The Canadians sent a little Royal Canadian Mounted Police Patrol of like about 30 blokes. And the officer of this went in and saw Sitting Bull, and he said, "Will you maintain the Queen's peace?" And Sitting Bull said yes, because he knew damn well that the Yanks would like slaughter him. And he did. I don't understand how Canadians are supposed to feel guilt for that. The Sitting Bull and the Sioux pissed off to Canada because they knew damn well if they went to Canada, they'd be safe. Where's the guilt?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've read of tribal warfare between the Comanches and the Apaches, or whoever they were, where they go into a village or community and genocide the people that are already there so they can take over their land. No one's
and on a smaller scale, the Aboriginal guys would do that to each other all the time.
Yeah,
but you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say it.
And the thing is, in Canada, we've even done favors with some of the natives. The Six Nations, for instance, they were our allies. We let them settle in Canada, a non-native territory to them. They were native to America. We let them settle here as our allies and friends because, well, thanks for serving with us against the Americans. We understand you're kind of screwed now with land, so we'll let you settle here. That's like a favor on our part. It's not their native land just because it's on the same continent. They settled a non-native territory, and yet stuff like that's just completely ignored.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It is an effective line of attack by the left because normally conservatives actually engage in it, when they shouldn't. They should just reject the premise. I don't feel guilt for what happened 200 years ago. See you later. I'm not going to engage in what I need to do and what repatriations I need to pay to try to make up for it. Like, they should have invented gunpowder. See you later.
Yeah, I totally agree, mate.
It's a silly argument,
And listen, I mean, the vast majority of in Australia, for example, the vast majority of like violence that happened between Aboriginal people and Australian settlers was some little isolated family in the middle of nowhere. There weren't big armies wandering around Australia trying to kill Aboriginals.
No.
Never happened here. Never did.
No, it was just different tribes scattered all over the place that were throwing sticks at each other. They've been doing that for 10,000 years,
and not even with fire. That's the funny thing, isn't that the only population in the world that forgot how to make fire?
Wow, the Australian Aboriginals. Listen, I had partly Australian Aboriginal mates who I thought were good blokes, but they didn't believe this bullshit. The Aboriginals were like absolutely in this Garden of Eden, and then the white guys came and destroyed it. They never believed that because they weren't that bloody well stupid. There was constant warfare between Aboriginal tribes and clans. And yeah, okay, they had paper bark huts in the country before Captain Cook found it. But I mean, well, okay, so what?
Yeah, and this is a very slippery slope I see. Is like you'll make the argument that, oh well, they were always fighting, and then we came in and we simply won the fight in the end. And they'll often the leftist response to that often is that, oh well, when we came in, it's an unfair fight. We had more men, better technology, blah blah blah. But it's like
Shame.
no single war in history has been a fair fight. Every single side in history had slight number advantages, maybe a technological advantage, maybe even a geographic advantage, closer to supply lines or whatever. You have a hill advantage, stuff like that. No single fight in history has ever been 100% fair. It's impossible to do. So at what line do we draw where it becomes a fair fight to a non-fair fight? You really can't.
Yeah, but no Aboriginal group ever crept up onto an enemy village at night and then went in and brained all the blokes and then took all the women as sex slaves. No Aboriginal group ever did that. And yeah, I am taking the piss, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. With all this moralizing, it's kind of just, all in the end, it's just kind of a joke, I find. Because at what point do you say it's moral and immoral? Which point do you say it's fine to do this, it's not fine to do that? Because I know Western warfare often had very strict standards compared to like some other parts of the world. There's always, okay, I mean, this is more a medieval thing, but the whole chivalry conduct that kind of somewhat survived later after even, there was different codes of honor that you would do in fighting and stuff. And there was certain standards that you didn't cross. And, it's just like, how moralistic do you have to get in warfare before it becomes moral, I suppose, It's like, if we're fighting a force with these Australians and they're not abiding by some of these same moral standards, I'm not going to blame them for it because, on one hand, it's like, okay, it's warfare. It's not really moral to begin with, but it's like, if we're fighting objectively more ethically than they are, then how can you really judge us for winning even, We had like a disadvantage, if anything, because we were fighting morally.
I just think, humans go into conflict and there were no great armies moving around either Australia or Canada ever that were aimed at like destroying the Aboriginal people. There weren't. It never happened. That's why Sitting Bull and the Sioux fled to Canada after Little Bighorn,
Yeah, like in the Americas, we killed most of our natives off just because of diseases. And I mean, yeah, it's technically our fault, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, if we're just exploring, it's not really our fault that we're spreading a disease. I mean, they always say, oh, the disease blankets. But, a lot of it simply just can't.
That disease blanket thing is a total load of crap. It really is. There's almost no evidence for it at all.
Well, yeah, exactly. How could it be? I mean, it's an organic material. It's going to disintegrate.
They didn't even understand those diseases at that time themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Germ theory wasn't even established yet. We didn't even know what really caused it. We thought it was like nice scented things would be like anti-disease and bad smelling things would be causing diseases. So it's like, what, we gave them dirty, disgusting blankets? I mean, they're not going to accept that.
No, absolutely not. I mean look at, you can look at like Australian expeditions to like try and find the north of Australia in the middle of the 19th century. Because like Australia, in the middle of the 19th century, most of the middle of Australia wasn't even known, like in the 1850s. And it was only after that they gradually, because most of it's bloody desert or semi-desert, and like going through it tends to kill you. But yeah, okay, there was a little bit of conflict with Aboriginal tribes, but there was no bloody wars with regiments going and attacking Aboriginals. Didn't happen in Australia, never did. And had the Australians wanted to do that, I reckon there wouldn't be one Australian Aboriginal left today.
And you know what else I don't understand is the whole treaty arguments. It's like they say, oh, you broke this treaty, you broke that treaty. It's like, if you look back in history, like even in like the 1600s with all the wars that happened during that period, you'll see it's like, okay, the start of a war usually was the breaking of a treaty because the treaty was made because, now we established peace. It's like everyone signing that, yeah, the treaty says we're going to have peace now. But at the same time, it's like, everyone knows there's going to be war in the future. It's not like a perpetual peace now because of a treaty being signed. And this is sort of the standards that you would go by in, even European on European wars. And yet with now all these native treaties, it's like all of a sudden we break one tiny standard, not even to fight them, but just slightly transgressing something. And then they blow up on it. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, it's a treaty. And yeah, maybe it says we're not going to transgress this. But I mean, to an extent, treaties are almost meant to be broken eventually. It's like, and the fact that we own this land, it's like I want to do good to them. I'm not going to lie. I don't want to just completely step on them. Let's have a good dialogue with them. But this sort of legalistic notion that treaties can never be broken, I find very, very shaky, because the sort of historical notions with treaties was that they're eventually going to be broken. That's the nature of them.
Well, they're literally signed at the point of a barrel of a gun, right? So. Yeah, but as far as like you said, Armin, I don't want to be particularly mean to my Aboriginal cousins down here. There's a lot of them that want separation. I'm okay with that. So if we want to create a big reservation somewhere in Western Australia where they can all go live, we can build a wall around it, give them some mining rights, or give them some resources so they can build a society for themselves and improve their living standards. That's fine by me, but get them out of my way. At this point.
That'd be a good question. Is like you pose to the main Aboriginal leader of the country and say, exactly how much money do you want right now for you to never ask for it again, and then set that precedent, and then keep referring to that as soon as the leftists start wanting to give them more. Just keep saying, nope, we set this standard. That's the treaty. 50,000 or however amount they want. Boom, done. We already paid our amount. No more. Now we're officially equal. We're officially no longer owing you.
That's right. You're sovereign citizens of whatever it is you want to call Wakanda Down Under, or whatever you want to call your country. So you can't get access to Aussie taxpayer dollars. Goodbye. I'd be happy with that at this point.
Yeah, it's bloody ridiculous. It just is. I mean, like, I think it's the same in Canada, but I know in Australia that like Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people get enormous financial benefits just by being Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, even if they're only very slightly Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people. Like 25% or something like that, or even less sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot of white Aboriginals walking around. They pop up in the news from time to time. They get
especially in Tasmania, for example.
It begs the question, doesn't it? Like if they're downtrodden and everyone's mental, why do people like that see advantage in claiming Indigenous ancestry? Why is that?
They get a lot of advantages. That's why.
Yeah.
Financial advantages, university courses, all sorts of training, like just about anything that a modern Western society can give you, those guys get, and they get more of it than any white working class guy or girl would get.
Well, a couple of years ago, Duke, I had the shits with work, and I actually applied to become a train driver just to do something completely different. And I was filling out the application form, and it got to the little drop-down box for ethnicity, like, are you Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? And obviously I had to say no. And at that point, I knew I was screwed, because with the prevalence of diversity quotas these days, they get pushed to the front.
I think there was a story a few years ago of some guy. I think he was in America. He's an Indian, right? Like, East Indies. And I believe we're still live streamed. I think he dressed as a black man because he knew that he would get more benefits or have a higher chance of joining university if he did so. And it worked out. He actually got in because he knew the affirmative action only applied to certain ethnic groups, and Indians were not as favored in that. So he actually successfully got in, and he wrote a whole article about it. And that drew quite a bit of controversy by the liberals at the time. Yeah, I think he was an American. I don't remember the specifics of the story, but it was quite funny.
It raises an interesting question. So given that I'm sure we've all got the same views on the evilness of these diversity quotas and what that really means for people like us, do you guys see it as moral lying to try to get around that on like a job application or some sort of whatever it happens to be.
I mean, as a young person, and also to sound a little pretentious, I am like a philosophy major, so I'm very much into whole like ethical things. I'm very mixed when it comes to morality in that sense. Like, I'm kind of inclined to almost do the might makes right thing and just sort of say, yeah, I can just completely manipulate and be fine. But even if I was to adopt a moral system, I'm kind of inclined to still say it's moral, just because I find the very notion itself immoral that there should be these diversity quotas. Like I wouldn't be able to get that in any country if I moved away as a minority, and you could say, oh, well, you're a rich white person, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I just don't see that as a relevant ethical criteria to change anything here. I don't think me being white changes that at all. And there's tons of poor white people I know anyways, so it's just a dumb standard overall.
I don't know. I just think, look, if we lived in nations where only the actual Aboriginal people got maybe a 10% diversity quota, we could probably live with that quite easily. And it wouldn't be totally unfair. I don't think it'd even make all that much difference, because a lot of them wouldn't take it up for assorted reasons. But I think that would be all right. But where we are now is that you've got these diversity quotas, but then they bring in like 50 million immigrants from the third world who are not Canadian and not Australian, and they want to do the same diversity quotas with those, when I'm trying to work out why aren't they even worse than the white people who were originally 200 years ago. That's my point to it. It's just ridiculous.
I don't know. I'm kind of against any diversity quota in terms of that. Like I would maybe make a concession to natives, just because, okay, we conquered you fair and square, but I still like doing them a good, even still.
No, that's what I was saying. It's like, I wouldn't mind that much if there was like some sort of 5 or 10% Aboriginal diversity quota. Fair enough, for people who originally have always been Australian or Canadian or whatever. But when all these guys arrive from Africa and from Southeast Asia and from China, etc., why the fuck do they get it? That makes no sense whatever.
I think we live in very soft times, because they don't realize just how good we're doing it for these native peoples. Even the fact that we're letting them have reserves itself is immensely generous. That's never been done in history. We could easily just as much say, okay, just don't be too loud and obnoxious and we'll let you survive. And that would have been a very generous thing to do in history. Now we're giving them reserves, so much financial help, and we're saying you're guaranteed a position in certain jobs. That's immensely generous. We could have easily just as much said, shut up or we'll kill your entire ethnic group. That's been done in history multiple times, and we wouldn't be that odd to do it even. I think in terms of these aid things, there has to be a general education instilled that says, we're doing you a favor, be thankful. We have to make it known that if you accept these terms, you're sort of an ally, so to speak. You're an allied tribe to the nation of, Canada or Australia. They really have to understand how much of a favor it is that we're merely letting them survive. Because that is a favor. That's never been done in history before. Never been done. The fact that we're giving them so much aid, it must be understood that they are an ally. Minimum.
I find foreign aid to be just another term for bribe. One of the when you get foreign aid restriction is here, the argument that they'll get thrown back at them is, well, if we want to do business in those countries, we need to provide this aid. So that sounds like a bribe to me, particularly when you consider that a lot of the foreign aid money doesn't actually trickle down in those other countries to the people that quote unquote need it. It ends up in the warlord or corrupt politicians' pockets, So for that reason, I'm for cutting all foreign aid.
What's your guys' thoughts on the whole Chinese influence in East Africa lately?
The Belt and Road Initiative. It's debt slavery. Simple as that.
Yeah, I hear in Kenya there was an incident recently with the railroad where the Chinese people working there were being very racist to the Kenyans, both using slurs but also kind of excluding the local Kenyans from even working on the train line.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Like even in Australia, like the Chinese are largely a separate entity. They're quite racist, bless them. So it doesn't surprise me that they look down their nose at Kenyans. But yeah,
Yes.
it's kind of a strange scenario, the Belt and Road Initiative. So basically, that China's been absorbing. Sorry, mate, my cat's just getting into something. Yeah, so China's just been absorbing all this massive inflow of money from us shipping out of manufacturing and buying Chinese goods, and they're weaponizing it against us by using it to create colonies in places like Africa. So we're actually funding in a way the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative.
True. Even more directly in places like Victoria, where Dan Andrews actually supports it, as does that bitch in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I think Scott Morrison's going to knock that Dan Andrews deal on the head.
I hope so. I've heard that. I hope it's true.
Yeah, look, as far as I'm concerned, the Chinese are welcome to Africa. It can be their problem.
Well, I lived in Africa for about 15 years, so in South Africa, and it's a great place, and there's some great people there. Not all of them white, by the way, but yeah, I don't think Africa is going to benefit much from China. In fact, I think what Africa will find is if China becomes the colonial power there, they'll start to regret the Brits leaving, to be honest. But yeah. All right, guys, we're going to shut this up in about probably 8 minutes or so. So, Armin, got any last minute thoughts you want to bring in?
I mean, we've talked about quite a few things right now in the stream, so I don't know which thing I should say that would sum it all up. But I guess just, I guess one takeaway I've been thinking about lately is just don't let your morality be defined by sort of modern standards, because modern standards are completely out of tune and completely left field. They're completely out of how do I say this? I'm messing up my words. I'm not used to being awake so early. They're completely out of whack. You can't really compare modern morality at all to historical morality, and that's not to say that modern morality is superior at all. So, well, when you're judging if something is moral or not, don't look at it from a modern lens at all. That's the final takeaway I'll give, I guess.
Totally agree. Jobu.
Yeah, well, when I was growing up, mate, yeah, we were very acutely aware of the fact we were part of the Commonwealth in Australia. The Commonwealth Games used to be a big deal, but that seems to have dropped off. And I think, I'm sure there's multiple reasons for this, but it felt like the UK turned its back on its Commonwealth, to be honest, when it started to entangle itself more and more with the EU. So hopefully, with Britain leaving the EU and things happening, like sending the Navy ships down here, there can be a bit of a reinvigoration of the Commonwealth. I remember Armin, when I was in Ontario in 2013, and I was seeing a Canadian girl at the time, and we went up to stay at a cabin, and we took the Queen Elizabeth Freeway, QEW, I think it's called. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it just sort of suddenly dawned on me that I was actually in another Commonwealth country, and it was a nice feeling, to be honest, and it was very similar. It had a similar feeling to Australia. So I think there is something in that, and I'd hope to see that come back, and we can, people talk about the Anglosphere facing into the world together. I think the Commonwealth might be a good place for that to start.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm a quite big supporter of Kanzok, for example. I would definitely like to see that. Anyway, Armin and Jobu, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going to play us out. I started with an Australian song, so now I'm going to finish with a Canadian song. So we're going to do that. And hopefully both you gents will come back and join us next month when we do the next one of these.
Yeah, sounds good, mate. I'll try and get some of those other people I was mentioning in if you'd like. I'll tag you in that group and see if we can get some other people in, like a South African or some other groups like that.
Thank you. That would be great, man. Jobu, Armin, thank you very much for coming on, guys.
No worries. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, nice talking.
Once again with the tide, she slips her lines, turns her head and comes away. Where she lay so still, there are privateers wharf. Now she quickly gathers way. She will range far south from the harbor mouth and rejoice in every way. Blue nose, the blue nose in the sun. Feel her bow rise free, a mother spree in a sunburst powder spray. It stings the cheek while the rigging wheels reek of sea miles gone away. She is always best under full dress, hard over as she lay. Who'll know the blue nose in the sun? Who'll know the blue nose in the sun? Crowd fastly on the Grand Bank Street for trade on every dime. New hard work in her time, hard work in every mind. Rich men's toys are the Gloucester boys with their token bit of cod. They snapped their spurs and strained to pass her by, but she left them all behind. Now her namesake daughter remains to show what she has been. But every schoolboy remembers and would not come again to say she's the last of the Grand Bank schooners that fed so many men. Who will know the blue nose in the sun? Who will know the blue nose in the sun? So does she not take wind like a living thing, child of the moving tide? Feel her last wet grace of the water's face, of clean and quiet grind. Our own tall ship of great renown still lifts unto the sky. Who will know the blue nose in the sun? Who will know the blue nose in the sun? Who will know the blue nose in the sun? Know the blue nose in the sun. Know the blue nose in the sun.
Okay, ladies and gents, good night. Hope to see you on Saturday for Splendid Isolation, and have a good week.